Good evening, my friends. Are you here for another spooky story? Then come on in. Settle in now, for tonight I have quite the tale to tell. Are you ready? Good. Then let us begin. What are ghosts? Really? Most would say they are figments of the imagination, or spirits from the deceased. Simple ideas, cut and dried. But why are there records of people witnessing the spirits of those who are still living? Or, even crazier, of themselves? In these cases, theories abound, and words like astral projection, glitch in the matrix, and place memories get thrown about. But here is a theory for you listeners at home. Do you believe that some instances of ghosts are not actually spirits, but moments in which we are able to glimpse through time? Such a theory would make sense for those who witness spirits that don't seem to notice or interact with them, and why some ghosts can seem to pass through walls that are in place now when they didn't used to be. There too are moments where people have indeed been able to glimpse back into the past without even witnessing spirits, such as in the case of Pat Price, an incredible psychic renowned for his remote viewing abilities during his time working with the CIA, who once managed to look into the past of areas he was tested upon and blew the minds of agents who were testing him. Look him up. The experiments are fairly interesting. Perhaps that little sense of déjà vu you feel when you encounter something new, yet strangely familiar, means you are really experiencing the same moment again. A moment captured in time, repeated for the eyes of spectators from an era you will never see. Now join me, my dear listeners, for tonight's story, The Pioneer Couple. This story I heard from several people in my family, though it was all retold from the experience relayed by my great aunt. For the sake of this story, we'll call her Helen. Helen is one of Papa's sisters, and therefore grew up on the same farm where I experienced a good portion of the crazy stories I have relayed to you. Yes, this includes my mother's spooky house. I won't get into the details of the terrain. I've spoken about the area's history in other videos, so at this point it would just be a 5-minute flashback. For those of you that missed out, just check out some of the videos like Coveralls and Unseen Intruder for the gist of it. However, one thing I did not cover was that the land I lived upon was once part of a larger farm, which was eventually broken apart and split between Papa and Helen after their father passed. Now, for a while, my great aunt had a house on a plot of land that was on a hill that, like where I grew up, was originally just a field for several generations. At the time, there was a huge tree down below her house. If memory serves me properly, I believe it was a mulberry tree. It had been there for many years, possibly before the house was even built, so it had gotten quite large for a tree of its sort. At the time, Helen saw no reason to get rid of the tree since it wasn't too near the house. Since it wasn't directly in her yard, it also escaped being pruned and prodded the way most everything else on the property was. Helen loved decorating and making her homestead look spiffy, so she was forever trimming this or planting that. That's why it came as no surprise that she was out gardening when the story took place. It was an overcast day, one in which the air was hot and stale, with the humidity building and building to the point you could almost feel the stagnation about the pop as a pimple might. As iggy as the air felt to her, it gave Helen a chance to get her flower beds weeded and new seedlings planted before the heavens broke loose. From her vantage point, she could easily make out the tree down from her yard. Now, I want to mention that, at the time, there were only a handful of neighbors around, most of them family. Few of them would show up without announcing their presence, as was courtesy in those parts. And common sense, because this was the backwoods, y'all. So she was surprised to look up and see standing beneath the tree were a pair of strangers. Up until that point, no one was nearby. The only traffic all day had been her own relatives, but none had come by in hours, so it was all quiet except for the fading bird song as all of the wildlife bedded down before the oncoming storm. She never heard anyone approach, and she had glanced up enough that she surely would have seen someone coming, especially if they were dressed for a different century. For lo, beneath the boughs of the mulberry tree stood a man and woman wearing what looked to be homemade clothing of the sort that most people had stopped wearing long ago. The man wore long trousers with suspenders and a long-sleeved shirt, while the woman wore a long-sleeved dress that came down nearly to her feet. The man wore a straw hat, and the woman had what looked to be a bonnet tied about her hair. They were elderly and looked as though they had stepped out of some ancient tintypes, now colorized and staring with a sobering, serious look of old mountain folk. Helen could not believe her eyes. Where had these people come from? At first, she wondered if maybe they were looking for relatives. While most people in the region actually dressed like most other people from the 90s, there were a few folks from some of the more fundamental Christian denominations and some of the more mountainous northern regions nearby that still dressed in the super modest old fashion. Perhaps they had just gotten lost. Helen stood, preparing to ask what they needed. The moment she began to rise, however, the couple winked out of existence. One moment they were there, and the next, poof, gone. Helen couldn't believe her eyes. They had been right there. She never broke eye contact. They just vanished. Thoroughly creeped out, Helen forgot her flowers and darted into her house, just in time as a loud clap of thunder boomed as her front door shut behind her. She went through her house, checking doors and windows and making sure all was locked up. She couldn't understand why, but seeing those people made her feel on edge. This was before the neighborhood was bad for break-ins and drug activity, so apart from one perennially cranky couple that lived on the hill across from her, she had nothing to fear from anyone nearby. Still, she just had the strangest feeling that something was about to happen. Once her house was all clear, she settled in to relax and listen to the storm. Remember how I said that one tree was quite large for its type? Well, trees, like all living things, cannot live forever, and having a colony of great black ants living inside hastened its fate along. During the storm, it was pitted against some very powerful winds and, being partially rotten on the inside, it was unable to withstand the force. When Helen went out to look the next day, all was silent, making the eerie scene of seeing the mulberry tree completely toppled over, its roots ripped from the ground and bits of splintered, spongy wood carved with ant trails, all the more surreal. All over, big black ants scurried, trying to make sense of their homes suddenly bursting apart. Helen never understood why she saw the strange pioneer couple beneath the mulberry tree, nor figured out who they were. It was the first and the last time anyone saw them, so it was a very strange incident that left much to speculation. Just who were those old people? Were they the spirits of one of the former landowners? If so, were they the ones that planted the tree? I'd like to think that they were, and perhaps, maybe they came back to spend one last afternoon beneath the cool shade of its branches before it, too, was gone from this world. Well, my friends, did you enjoy this story? What do you suppose my great aunt saw, and why? Do you think my theory is correct, or do you have one of your own? Be sure to leave your own analysis in the comments below. Before you go, be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Don't forget to hit the notification bell, that way you can catch your latest spooky fix the moment it comes out. And check out my Patreon page at patreon.com/Phantasmal Poppy. Thank you. Good night, and see you all real soon.